A collection of phone privacy questions, Cloudflare concerns, the recent Firefox terms of service changes, and more. Welcome to the Surveillance Report 236 Q&A, where we answer questions from our amazing patrons who allow us to make this podcast for all of you. You can view and join the questions on patreon.com/surveillancepod or xmrchat.com/surveillancepod. A couple of quick notes before we jump in. First up, one of the patrons was asking yesterday, because you guys may have noticed we didn't release the Q&A until like Friday, and there were only 2 questions, and he was like, hey, a bunch of people ask questions. We typically record on Fridays. So if you ask a question after Friday, it will not be in that week's Q&A. Speaking of, if you have a question on the weekend, I would prefer you wait until the latest episode drops and ask it there. Otherwise, it's a little bit chaotic for me to try and round up all the questions, but I'll do my best. That's just a personal request. And on that note, we had literally, I didn't count, but probably close to a dozen or more questions this week. So we're going to do our best to kind of rapid fire these. We apologize if our answers are not as fleshed out as usual for the sake of time, but hopefully we will still give you satisfying and complete answers. So first off, we're going to start off with a few questions that are related mostly to phone stuff. We'll start off with Arc. This isn't specifically about phones, but it's heavily related. You say, I understand it's super easy these days to keep unique, strong passwords or passphrases through a password manager, but how do you guys deal with pins, specifically numerical pins? So like YubiKeys, mobile apps, things like that. You say, personally, I'm very good at keeping unique passwords, but when it comes to pins, I find myself using the same code across multiple places. It's not as easy to autofill pins, especially on mobile, and trying to memorize multiple unique pins becomes a hassle very quickly. How do you guys deal with this, and do you have any suggestions? So honestly, I just don't memorize a lot of pins. I know my debit card pin, I know my phone's pin, and honestly, I do use a longer pin for Bitwarden to like unlock it quickly, but then I have it set to relock pretty quickly after that. I think my question would be try to memorize just the pins that you actually need access to all the time. Personally, my YubiKey doesn't ask me for pin very often, so in those cases, I'm cool with just opening my password manager and getting the pin that way. But the same thing with passwords. You really only need like your password manager passphrase, your computer passphrase, maybe a couple others. Try to just find a couple pins that you need to remember and just be content with taking a few extra seconds to find the ones that you don't use as often in your password manager. Not everything needs to autofill. That would be my suggestion. In my experience, you tend to memorize the pins pretty quick, but yeah, just try to limit what you have to remember.
Yeah, I keep my system pretty easy. I don't think pins are normally used in highly sensitive areas. In your examples with the YubiKey, it's literally just a security improvement. If there was no pin on it at all, it would still be extremely secure. When it comes to things like getting into your phone apps, I also just think that's like one extra layer of security, and it's fine if you're using the same pin in those contexts. So it's not something I'm normally super concerned about. So I normally use the same pin across the board. Khaled asked about private eSIM services. He said he's been using Silent Link recently and love how he can switch to almost any carrier no matter where I am. I was wondering what the good options are, if there are any. So yeah, Silent Link, the way I present this to people is that almost all phone carriers are pretty much the same from a privacy perspective. The only difference is what it takes to register for them, which is still a big improvement, right? If you're buying your phone plan without any identification that directly identifies you, especially if it requires an ID or something like that, or KYCing yourself or a social security number check, that's a huge win. And things like Silent Link do take this a step further because they accept Monero payments and they are pretty much completely pseudo-anonymous. With that said, there is one provider, and again, I have yet to test this myself. I have had a meeting with their team to ask them some questions because they seem genuinely interesting. And also someone else's question here is about them, which is from Oddbite, who asked about Cape. Looking at their privacy policy, they say that they share data to some of their trusted partners, but in the same breath, they say that they never sell your data. They say they're not happy with the privacy policy link and it's a little bit hard to find. And pretty much they're asking for thoughts on Cape. Again, I haven't used it yet, and I'm still kind of breaking it apart myself on my end. But on my end, I'm very interested in them. For context, there is no accounts with Cape. You literally just generate a QR code, kind of like Silent Link, except it's from what seems to be a pretty reputable company. It's pretty much SIM swap resistant. They formally partnered with Proton. So there's like a little bit of, I guess, validity there when they're partnering with really legitimate services in the space. And based on the meetings I had with them, I was really impressed with a lot of their knowledge and the stuff they were doing. And Cape actually is the first company I've seen that isn't just giving you private sign-up options. They actually have deeper access to their own cell towers, and they're trying to do things like pretty much minimize all the logs to be literally like the legal minimum. And even they're trying to rotate some device identifier. So they're doing some truly novel stuff. But I haven't used it. I can't recommend it yet. These are just kind of things on paper that I'm interested in right now.
Yeah, I have no experience with Cape other than the story that we've covered. The only notes I have is I went and looked at the website to try and verify the things that you mentioned. I'm not sure what you meant about the privacy policy. For me, it was normal. I scrolled to the bottom of the page, I clicked privacy policy, it took me straight there. So maybe if you can like send me some screenshots of what you encountered, I'm not sure what you mean. As for the privacy itself, I didn't see anything about trusted partners. I don't know if you were using that as like a shorthand for like, they say they share data. But me personally, and this was a very quick skim, I did in like a couple of minutes last night. This wasn't really a deep dive. But to me, I didn't see anything that really set off alarm bells. A lot of the data they collected is when you make an account. Pretty standard stuff that obviously they would need to collect if you're making, like if you're signing up for service. Actually, in light of what Henry said, I would double check that part. But when I looked at it originally, I was like, yeah, this seems normal. And then in terms of sharing the data, they basically say they use your data to make the service work, which is no duh. Prevent abuse, which is, in my opinion, also a no duh. And they say they will comply with legal orders and any sort of acquisitions and mergers, which to me is also a no duh. So I didn't see anything about in there about sharing with trusted third parties or personalized offers, or these are usually the things you see when it's a little bit more suspicious. And
I didn't even go to the bottom at the top. I just pulled it up now. If you go under features, in literally their header, minimal data collection is the first thing. And they like have a nice chart that literally details everything, like phone number, location, time of arrival, location, angle of arrival, observed time difference of arrival, GPS coordinates, location, cell ID, and it tells you literally exactly why it's used, who has access to it, and the logging policies regarding it as well. It's like extremely thorough. So I actually, it's well done from what I can tell.
but that's not the privacy policy itself, right?
It's not, but it's their like essential overview of like the cell carrier offerings. It's more thorough than many privacy policies actually, just in itself, even though it's like a features page about their privacy.
Let's hop back to Ark's first question. You just said, also, is there a piece of software that either of you have heard about for a long time but never bothered to check out, either because you didn't understand the appeal or have a use case, but then you did try it out and actually enjoyed it? The main thing that comes to mind for me, and this is pretty unique for me, is Astro, which is a framework. So for those of you who don't know, sometimes a lot of websites are built on what's called a framework, which is basically, and you can see it on the New Oil because we're open source. I don't know how to really explain it. It's basically like a website generator. So I can edit the website in Markdown, which is a lot easier than HTML or CSS. And then I don't have to go edit every single page. And I've done this recently, actually, where when I move things around, like, oh, I think this goes in the moderately important section, and this goes, and it used to be in the least important and stuff like that. When you move things around, it makes the whole process a lot easier, and it can tell you in advance if there's any errors, it's not formatted correctly, blah, blah, blah. I think it was actually, what was his name? David from Safing. He was actually the first one to suggest it. He's like, you should really look into this. And I didn't see a use case for it. But then when I started working with my current web developers, they wrote it in Astro. And once I got the hang of it, I was like, okay, I get it now. This is really, really easy and convenient, actually. So
yeah, I think for me, I think it was like a cloud-based password manager, to be honest, because I was using KeePass for the longest time. And I still love KeePass. I still have a couple databases I use for just very sensitive offline things. But actually migrating to something that just by default syncs and makes my life so much easier. I can't express the convenience versus security trade-off here, and how for me it was just not worth it to use KeePass for everything and have to always figure out how to sync it on different devices. So moving to Proton Pass was like one of the best decisions I've made in a long time. I think I could have also done it with Bitwarden or 1Password or literally any other provider, and I would have still felt kind of the same benefits. So that is something for me. And if you still have a good use case for KeePass, please keep using it. But as someone who like needed a better way to sync across varying devices that had to constantly enter and exit my ecosystem, it just wasn't working super well for that. And the other thing was having like some kind of very basic local AI as well. That's something that I was like, that seems kind of stupid. And I think I more than communicated that on this podcast. So that's a fairly public breadcrumb there that you guys can follow. But, I've been finding a lot more use cases for it where it's like helping me, like if I need to just quickly summarize something that doesn't need to be that sensitive, I just throw it in there and it can give me really good stuff. I'm doing local transcriptions for a lot of video content, and it's really helpful for that stuff because I can, instead of having to watch a whole 20-minute video that I'm recording and editing, I can just transcribe that with local AI, have local AI analyze it and kind of give me like, oh, what's some good timestamps or what's something like this. Things that might take me 10, 15 minutes to do myself that are pretty much done instantly now. So those are two key things I can think of. Oddbite asks, what are other privacy podcasts or channels do you guys recommend? I'm getting into the whole RSS podcast thing with AntennaPod, and I'm looking for other similar podcasts. Yeah, so I actually don't consistently listen to any privacy and security podcasts. I don't really engage too much with the content, not because I dislike it or I don't think there's anything good out there. It's too much intermixing between my personal life and my work life. And for me, my work life is already a big part of my identity because I'm here myself and I care a lot about this stuff. And so I don't want to just make this literally my whole life. So like the podcasts I listen to have nothing to do with privacy and security. With that said, I really like SES podcasts, Opt Out. Darknet Diaries is a really popular one in our community. I know people really used to like Michael Basil's podcast. So those are some various options I've seen that people really enjoy.
My answer is check the resources page on The New Oil. If you go to the website, up at the top, it says links. Because honestly, most of the podcasts and YouTube channels I list there, I also follow. Not all of them, but most of them. Naomi Brockwell, Opt Out is really good. He's only putting out a couple episodes a year now, but he's a pretty busy dude. I listen to Techlore Talks. I follow Privacy Guides. They've started putting out some videos. I follow Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons, which for the record, I recommend you guys follow him too, because he also does news every other week. So you kind of get another perspective, and he covers a lot of the same stories we do. He covers some of the stories we miss. I think the only one I don't list that just popped into my head is EFF has a podcast where they interview different people about a lot of the challenges we're facing in the digital world right now and what their solutions and proposed ideas are. So, but that would be a good starting point, is just check my website, because honestly, I listen to a lot of those same ones. Why do you guys think there haven't been any Graphene OS-based Android ROMs? Personally, if I had to choose a base for a new ROM, I'd always go with Graphene because they're already private by default, have Sandbox, Google Play, and on top of the line security. The honest answer is because if you're starting your own ROM, you probably want to do something different. And there's no point in undoing all the work that somebody already did. Like, this is why, Linux Mint recently moved off of Ubuntu to Debian, which Debian is upstream of Ubuntu. And Mint was basically like, we spend half of our time undoing all the shit that Ubuntu did, so it makes more sense just to move straight to Debian and rebuild from there, and it's still less work. So I think if anybody were to make another Android ROM, either A, they're going to look at Graphene and say, well, it's 90% of the way there, I'm just going to offer suggestions on what I would like to see. Or alternately, you're going to look at Graphene and you're going to go, that's really cool, I respect what he's doing, but I have something completely different in mind. And like I said, it doesn't make sense to undo everything he did just to go in a different direction. So at that point, you would just go upstream to AOSP itself and make the changes there, which is what most ROMs do.
Yeah, I just don't know what the use case would be. It's actually an issue I have with the open source community in general. I know sometimes it's necessary, so I'm glad that this feature of open source exists. I don't wish it was gone, but it is a bit ridiculous sometimes when like people just fork projects like nothing. And it's like, oh, there's 8 forks of one project. Oh, this one adds a different theme. This one adds a different font. And it's like, just push it upstream, damn it. Like,
I don't want to go too long, but real quick, I do want to point out, this is a common misconception, is that Calyx is based on Lineage. And that's probably where this question is coming from, is like, well, Calyx is based on Lineage. Why doesn't anybody base on Graphene? Calyx is not based on Lineage. Calyx and Lineage work together very closely, which is why there is so much overlap, but they are both based off AOSP. The idea of basing a ROM on another ROM is actually pretty rare. I think
EOS is based on Lineage.
They're the only ones that come to mind.
Next question is for maps. Would you guys be interested in a service that proxies Google Maps to pull traffic data? This way, Google only sees that someone is looking at a certain area and doesn't get your location. I think that's something similar to how Aurora Store proxies Google. Yeah, I mean, I would love this. This is pretty much what like Duck.AI is doing with AI chat models, right? It's anonymously proxying to there. So I think this would be great. I think to some extent, DuckDuckGo might even do this with its own built-in maps with the third-party providers that it has in there. So I'm fully on board with this. Just be aware that anything that's a proxy or that is downstream of a main provider is still dependent on that and not really breaking free entirely. This is why we like to post to things like PeerTube instead of just encouraging you guys to use YouTube alts. You can still do that, but just keep in mind that's like a temporary solution to a much bigger problem.
I largely agree. I said a couple weeks ago, that's my biggest complaint with navigation apps is no traffic in most of them. And that's a huge obstacle for adoption, in my opinion. The next question says, is there any reason to be cautious of Cloudflare? I get there's concerns about them being a single point of failure, and if they go down, a huge portion of the internet goes down with them. But Cloudflare is a huge company with a lot of resources, so isn't that exactly what you want from an anti-DDoS company? Are we just crapping on Cloudflare for being the best, or are there real concerns? The answer is both. First of all, yes, we have actually seen real-world examples where like somebody accidentally pushed some bad code and a third of the internet went down for like an afternoon. But I've mentioned this before, it really depends on how the person using Cloudflare has configured it. You can either configure it to be a man in the middle and issue their own certificates, in which case they are an actual man in the middle. They can see your clear net traffic and your passwords and everything. Or alternately, you can spin up your own certificates and tell the configuration like, nope, I've got this. I just need you to handle tunneling or DDoS or whatever. and then they get significantly less data. It is worth noting they do still get metadata. Their privacy policy, last time I heard and checked, was pretty decent. Like, I think they hold on to the data for like 24 hours for like fraud abuse. They do some aggregated data collection for like statistics and trends. But as with everything, that's a question of how much do you trust it. Some people don't trust them. But in answer to your question, I think it's both. I think some of it is just paranoia and hating on the big guy. But I do think there are some legitimate concerns, especially depending on your threat model.
I'm well aware of the concerns with Cloudflare, but I don't have as much of a fight to pick with them. I think they overall offer a super good service. People hate on Cloudflare until they have to deal with tons of DDoS attacks. Your options then become a little bit more pro Cloudflare typically when that happens. Of course, there are many Cloudflare alternatives, but Cloudflare just makes it super easy and they have great usability and they have a overall pretty solid track record in terms of protecting data. And that's literally their entire business model. So if they did anything really shitty, like that would be literally game over for them. So they do have a really good incentive to do the right thing in most cases. But I do agree that over-centralization is a problem. I do agree that Cloudflare is a big amount of trust that you're putting in one company. So it's stuff I'm aware of, but I'm actually not super anti against Cloudflare personally. But it really depends on your own personal values. So I would definitely see how it fits into your personal life. So these are a couple of updates to some other questions that they left. Pretty much, we recommended using uBlock Origin Lite on a browser on their Chromebook previously because their school mandates Chrome usage. And they said that they block this kind of thing. So is there anything else to do? In this situation, I would probably say no, but the overall advice still stands, which is you have to still keep things compartmentalized if you're able to. So just be aware that there is very little privacy on this device. Try to use it for only school stuff that's needed for school, and anything else gets pushed to a different device.
I don't have much to add there. I hear you because my work is the same way. Certain extensions I can add, certain ones I can't. I can install Firefox, but not Brave for some reason. But yeah, the point is to just look for areas where you can improve. And sometimes you can't. I hate to say that. Like sometimes you're up a creek and what you have to use is what you have to use. But the important thing is just to ask those questions, which you did. And I'm sorry we don't have any better answers, but you can go through the settings. You can look online, see what people are recommending, because you never know, like maybe uBlock's not allowed, but maybe like AdBlock is, or Ghostery. And personally, I don't like those extensions as much as uBlock, but I think they're better than just not using anything. So even if it's a less than ideal solution, look for those solutions that will still move the needle. And then similarly, the other update you left, you asked questions about what to do if you're under 18, because a lot of privacy services only apply to people who are 18. And we kind of took the side of like, well, it probably doesn't matter because your data probably doesn't start getting out there until you start getting older. But you said in your case, it is. Like you did your name search and you found your actual info alongside your family. In that specific scenario, you can always request data takedowns yourself. It is a tremendous time suck, but it is an option. Or maybe you could try hitting up services like Easy Opt-outs or like Delete Me and ask them, is there any reason you don't work with people under 18? And you could send them these links and be polite, don't like, you guys suck, you won't. And which, not that I'm saying you would do this, but just for listeners in general, like, don't be like, you guys suck that I can't use this. Just, hey, genuinely asking, because they might go back to their lawyers. They might be like us. They might be like, oh, we didn't realize this was a problem for 16-year-olds. Let's go to our lawyers and see if this is something that we can safely offer underage users. Or maybe it's like, hey, there's this law in place where we can't do this because XYZ, which would be weird because there's no data privacy laws in the US. But I guess it's the same thing, is maybe just try to find solutions that are available to you. It's a really crappy place to be in where your data is still getting stolen, but a lot of these services won't cater to you. Just try to think outside the box, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add there. Just keep tabs on it, and worst case scenario, just keep the note, and then when you turn 18, you can do it yourself. The next questions are from Dark Horse MBA. Given Firefox's new privacy policy in terms of use, do you think it's still a good private browser option, especially when compared to a modern Brave install? Yeah, it's a bit controversial. I definitely think they messed up with that, but I think it was also completely overblown by a lot of people. But, in the context of it being Mozilla and like a long series of things, then I fully get it. Either way, I think Firefox is still a good option. I still use it for a few things here and there. And a lot of great browsers like Tor browser, Mullvad browser are still based on Firefox. And you can very easily opt out of the concerns if you really are still concerned about that kind of stuff. But I also think Brave is a great browser. So I don't really have a reason to overall recommend everybody moves to one or the other. But I'm not going to say just avoid Firefox because of that one thing that has now been addressed and you can easily opt out of if you're still very concerned and it doesn't change how good the browser is for other people like the Tor browser and Mullvad.
I'm in the boat, and I've said this publicly, where I think Brave and Firefox both suck, like as companies. I think Mozilla has a lot of perfectly valid criticisms, like the fact that they clearly do not know how to run a company because they've never had to worry about funding before getting all their money from Google. They clearly have jacked up priorities where they keep making all these stupid acquisitions that make no sense. Some of them are very questionable, like advertising and analytics. But at the same time, Brave CEO is a garbage human being. I will say that on the record. I don't care. Brave as a company has done some shady things like lying about collecting funds on behalf of users. They've got their whole crypto thing, which I don't think is inherently bad, but it's certainly bloat for somebody like me who's not interested in it. I think they both suck. So honestly, I think you should just use whichever one speaks to you. I think there's people who vehemently hate the Chromium monopoly and will never use Brave. And I think that's a perfectly valid take. I think there's people who say Brave is objectively better for privacy out of the box because they have a lot of built-in things like you don't need to add an ad blocker. It's got one built in. It's got fingerprint randomization. It's got, all these different features. And the only thing I would say is I think people who sit on their little, what do you call it? Their little tunnel vision high horse where they're like, oh my God, Brave is the worst thing ever. I can't believe you use it. Here's all the problems with it. They're purposely turning a blind eye to all of the equally crappy things that Firefox does. Use whichever one speaks to your values and you feel the things that suck less that they're doing, I guess. And then your next question, we kind of sort of touched on this, so I'm going to be real quick on this, but you said, how, if any, are the most private ways to use services where there are no really good private options? So for example, you mentioned YouTube Premium. There's services like Odyssey and PeerTube, but a lot of the time they don't have a lot of the same creators, are hard to find. You also said like ChatGPT, for example, or any public AI. You can install a local LLM, but they're not the same quality. I haven't noticed that myself, but you may be in a situation where your computer can't run a local LLM, for example. Now we do have things like Lumo and Duck AI, but my answer to that, as always, is just harm reduction. Look at ways that you can reduce the suckage. So if you're going to use YouTube, use uBlock Origin. Try not to sign in, which if you're using, and I don't even mean for the ad blocking, I mean for like the tracker blocking. Try not to sign in, but if you're using YouTube Premium, you have to sign in to get those features. Try not to use it. If you can find people that are on Odyssey or PeerTube, go that way. Or things like Nebula, that's for YouTube, GPT. Again, there's Lumo, there's Duck AI, there's Brave AI. Just try to find the things that suck less, even if they're not ideal.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add there.
And then real quick, because this was kind of snuck into your question, you said, while on the topic of YouTube, is a browser such as Brave more private than the app? 100% yes. 99% of the time, I would actually be really curious to see the 1% of the time this is not true. Using the browser is always going to be more private. This is a gross oversimplification, but apps have a lot of permissions and it's a lot harder to meaningfully track the trackers in the app. But if you can run something out of a browser, especially something like Brave or Firefox with uBlock Origin, that's going to block a lot more of the trackers. It's going to sandbox it a lot better from the other apps on your device. It's just going to give you all the same protections as the browser whenever possible, especially with something like YouTube or Google or something proprietary that you know is going to be tracking you like Facebook. The browser is always going to be the way to go if you can.
What are your thoughts on using email aliasing services? I use iCloud and IVPN's MailX. My concern is what happens if either of these services cease to exist. I mean, it's always a bit of a concern. Definitely only go with a reputable service. I don't think Apple's going anywhere anytime soon. So if you're using their, like, whatever they call it, the hide my email feature, you're probably good in that regard. IVPNs is still in beta, so if this is your main concern, I would definitely wait for it to at least be out of beta. Simple Login has made some kind of like promises when it comes to this in terms of like always supporting your aliases, even if you like stop paying for a subscription, etc. So it really is a bit of a trust system here and what services you think will last a long time. And you know what? Like the way to look at it, you'd probably have to do this anyway. Like if your regular email provider goes under, you'd have to update your emails on these accounts anyway. So if you really want ownership over this, get a custom domain and then use a custom domain with all of these aliasing services. So that way you always own your own custom domain. And that way it'd be something like, any alias you want at yourdomain.com. And then if Simple Login, IVPN, Apple goes under, you just create a catch-all for that. And then you still get all your emails like nothing even happened.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The solution here is a custom domain. I don't think MailX supports that yet, but I know they said it was on their roadmap. Next up is David Johnson. You say you have 3 questions. You say 3 opinion questions specifically. Number 1, how do you think the approach of presenting private information as personal property compares to representing privacy as a human right when winning over skeptics? So for example, on a recent surveillance episode, we talked about how Brazil is trying to implement a legal framework where people can get paid for their data. Recently, I've had a lot more success focusing on just the human right aspect of things because the idea of getting paid for your data is so foreign to Americans. And especially in America, I think a lot of us know it would be like, oh, cool, I get 6 cents a year from Facebook. Like, woo, what do I care? I guess try it and let me know how it works for you. But for me, I try to focus more on, I've been focusing lately on practical impacts of privacy. I'm not trying to go for these high level, like, well, theoretically, shouldn't you get paid for it? And also, according to the UN of blah, 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 Article 12, 1948. I do know that one for the record. But what I try to focus on instead is like, well, you have kids. You don't want your address out there where any pedophile can find it on the internet, right? You have a bank account that I know there's not much in there, but if somebody hacked it and took all your money, you wouldn't be able to eat, right? Like, these are practical things that speak to you. Are you tired of ads? Are you tired of forgetting your password? I try to focus on those secondary side effects that are practical and tell people like, I can improve your life. Because really, when companies market to us, isn't that the promise they're making us is, I'm going to make your life better. I'm going to make you this tasty food. I'm going to sell you this entertaining video game or streaming service. I'm going to sell you this product that makes life quicker, easier, less work, etc. So I try to take that same approach. And so far, it's a challenge to find what speaks to people, especially if I don't know them. But once I figure out like this is something they care about, I find that to be a fairly effective, at least for opening the door. I haven't had a lot of luck with like getting people to download Bitwarden on the spot, but it gets that conversation started in a way where they're like, oh, yeah, I could see why I would care about privacy now.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't tested trying this, so this might speak to someone who's maybe a little bit more like, like a business owner. They see things this way. So maybe it might click with different people, but I've never tried this before. So I can't say anything.
Real quick, I have tried it before a couple times. And yeah, I usually got met with a lot of like, well, I'm not doing anything with it. How would I monetize it? I don't care. I haven't had much success with it because I remember the argument I used to make is like, if you wrote a book or you made a CD, who in their right mind would just walk down to the bookstore and be like, hey, I wrote this book, you can sell it and I don't want any of the money. It's like, you made it, it's yours. And that's the same thing with data, is it's your data that they are selling and not cutting you in. And I just remember that argument didn't really seem to speak to people, so I kind of stopped using it.
Yeah, so the next question from David is essentially asking, how do we keep privacy respecting technologies legitimate in the sense of not just open to cyber criminals and scammers? And it is really difficult, and it's something that I think needs to be discussed more, because a lot of providers, this impacts everybody, right? This isn't just about, yes, it's like the ethical right thing to do is to try to prevent this kind of stuff from happening, but also if a service is 30% used for literally cyber criminal activity and you're also using the service, that puts you in jeopardy and it puts the service in jeopardy as well. Personally, I am a fan. I don't think this should be the only option, but I am a fan of paying for services. I really like the model of like, if you're going for something for free, like let's say Proton, it's a bit more restrictive on what kind of information you need to provide. But if you pay, they kind of let you bypass a lot of their stuff. I think it's a fair model. You can pay to use the service, or if you're a free user that's giving no information, it's going to be a little bit more thorough. And I kind of understand why they do that. It is kind of a catch-22, as David says, but I do think it's not a bad compromise at the moment. And that's kind of what I've seen a lot of services try to achieve.
I don't know. It is a legitimate concern and a catch-22, like you said. And I try to think of it from the perspective of like, not everyone has the money to pay for a service. So for example, I would love to host an Nextcloud server, but the problem is the people that I can charge for it, because I don't want people abusing it. I don't want people loading up all kinds of illegal content on there, and now I'm responsible for it. So I can make it a paid service where the amount of abuse is going to drop to nearly zero, most likely. But then that's not fair to people who are like, well, if I could pay for it, then I probably have the resources to pay for a VPS and just do it myself. I try to think of it from this perspective of making sure that, because privacy is a human right, and so therefore it should be accessible even to people who don't have money. But also, like, yeah, it's really tough. Like you said, it costs money to support and develop these things. It costs money to deploy them and run them and keep them updated and secure. And it's just, yeah, I think as a business model, I'm a huge fan of freemium, but in terms of like preventing abuse, I don't know. I think it's kind of a struggle. Paywalls are great for weeding out abuse, but it's just so hard to do it in a way that's equitable. It's one thing when we're talking about like a podcast Patreon, like who cares? But when we're talking about like a privacy service that offers you what we argue is a human right, I don't know, man. I don't have answers, but it is a good question that I hope people are trying to tackle. And then the last question from David Johnson, you said in the previous Q&A, the question of encouraging privacy awareness and good practices in teens and minors has come up. One of the barriers is that it's pretty well established that kids, once they hit a certain age, they stop listening to their parents and they tend to kind of look more towards their peers or people that they perceive as cool and trendy. So again, this is a catch-22 where the people they're most likely to perceive as cool are those who are oversharing. how would you try to overcome this state of things? So first of all, cop-out answer, I wouldn't. I already said last time when we talked about this, I am not the right person to be trying to address this audience. I give off very strong youth pastor energy. I'm going to stick with that phrasing. However, I do want to really quickly push back on the people who are perceived as cool are the people who are oversharing. I don't think that necessarily has to go hand in hand. There are many, many ways to capture people's respect and attention, which is why we see a lot of influencers who do things that, in my opinion, are absolute brain rot. But then there's also people out there who are putting out good content, helpful content, that are being very mature, that still get millions and millions of views from younger people. I guess the point I'm getting at is I don't think it necessarily has to be the people who are oversharing and terminally online who can garner a following and respect. I think there's probably a balance that can be achieved there. The same way that we've done it. We've gone online, we've shown our faces, we've given up some of our privacy, but we don't have to overshare every single aspect of our lives. I do sometimes, but we don't have to.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why these are catch-22s, honestly. I think people are influenced by their parents. They're influenced by things they do. Everything you do cultivates different things in your life and what you believe in. So I think it's very complicated. It's not this or that. Different people are influenced by different things. What you choose to read, the books you rent from your library, the videos that you watch on YouTube, the channels you're subscribed to, everything that you engage with in the world has some kind of influence on your worldview. So treat that attention seriously. Apricot, with the recent release of Proton Authenticator, can you think of any reasons not to switch from Aegis? An advantage of Proton Auth for me is end-to-end encrypted cloud syncing via a Proton account, if I lost my device, etc. Honestly, it's kind of a weird situation because I'd ask you why you weren't already on NT-Auth if this was the only thing you needed, because NT-Auth would have already done this, which is give you end-to-end encrypted cloud syncing via an overall trusted account that you can use even with alias information a bit easier than you can with your Proton account. And it's even further separated from your Proton credentials. So no, actually, I'm a huge fan of Aegis. I think it's a great authenticator. We still recommend it on the Techlore resources, but for most people, honestly, I just don't know why they would use Aegis for most situations. Maybe if you like the interface better or something like that, or you're Android only exclusive and it's only for that one device. But I think for the average person, they're going to want something cross-platform. They want something they can recommend to their friends and family. They want something that opens them up to be able to switch out devices here and there. And I think these cross-platform options like NT and Proton Authenticator are going to be pretty good options for most people. And you can use both of those offline without an account to still do what Aegis does. The only reason still at this moment, and I hope this changes, to still use Aegis over Proton Auth is Proton Auth is only available from the Google Play Store. So you have to get it from Aurora. So if you're not using anything like that, Aegis I think is still on F-Droid and other app stores. But I hope that's not a permanent thing. And NT doesn't have that problem.
The only thing I have to say here is this is a perfect example of like, what are your needs and threat models? If you are using Aegis and you're not happy with it for some reason, then that's your reason to switch. You mentioned specifically, you said you checked your backups and the last cloud backup was 23 days ago. And my last manual was older than that. So, I mean, check the settings. Can you tell it to update more frequently? If you can't, and if you're like, I don't want to have to think about my backups, there you go. That's your reason to switch. If you would prefer to stick with something local, then try to think of other outside of the box solutions. So for example, you could have maybe an encrypted note, like standard notes or something, where you save the actual TOTP seeds. So that way, if it gets lost, you can drop them into another app or something and they have a backup. You could add a second form of 2FA like YubiKeys or, God forbid, SMS backup. Keep in mind that technically now you're only as strong as your weakest link. You could have two authenticator apps. You could have Aegis on one phone and then like a backup phone where you keep a second copy of Aegis. And that way, if your one phone breaks or gets lost, you still have it on the other phone or the other Android device. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, what do you want? If Proton is offering you things that Aegis is not, and you're not happy with whatever Aegis is offering, go to Proton. Or like Henry said, go to NT, go to whatever it is that fits your needs in your threat model.
And dudes, bros, and gals out there, these are all free open source apps. You're comparing the cream of the crop is the slogan, I believe. Like, these are all great services. So use them. They're all free to try. You can literally export and import between all three of them. You can literally download NT Proton on your current Aegis phone and export your Aegis into those two of them and just try them out. Yes, I appreciate you guys asking us these questions, and I'm really happy to answer them and give you my feedback, but also like try them out yourself. That's probably going to answer it for you as well. You're probably going to like one the best is my guess.
Yeah, don't forget, we've said this before in the context of like going too far with privacy. There's nothing stopping you from like going back or switching. So you could try all three apps, which is stuff I've done before, is I've tried out multiple apps and been like, I like this one best. And you can delete even Proton. Like, let's say you don't have a Proton account, you make one to try out the Authenticator and you end up thinking like, oh, this isn't my cup of tea. Delete your Proton account. Oh,
Look what's on this phone right now. Like, I'm literally doing testing between like 3 email providers right now, and I'm seeing what their mobile clients are like. Just play around with it. They all have exports and imports. Try it out. I'm not saying this to be a smart ass, but like seriously, I feel like people, like once they're using something, it's like, well, I don't know if I want to switch, but actually like a lot of times with the services that we recommend, the huge thing that they sell is data portability. And that is why we like data portability, so that you guys can take your data, try importing it somewhere else, see if you like that ecosystem and be like, oh, this is actually 10 times better. This is why eventually I switched to Proton Pass, because I was using KeyPass and I could literally just instantly migrate my KeyPass database to Proton Pass, see if I liked it. If I didn't, I just delete my Proton Pass account and then go back to using KeyPass as if nothing happened. And so I think it's really important for you guys to take advantage of data portability to see if you always have your best workflow. Don't be afraid to change things, because you've done all the hard work that most people don't do. Most people are trapped into their big tech ecosystems. But why would you have the same downsides of being trapped in your own ecosystem when you can do literally anything you want? Like, you guys have a superpower, so use it.
Well said. And then one more quick question, kind of adding on to this. You said, are there any reasons to avoid desktop 2FA apps? Not really. I mean, there's just the general thing of be aware of cloud sync risks. Theoretically, like something like Proton or Ente is end-to-end encrypted, so theoretically it should be safe, but you never know if there's a data breach. We can never prove that there's not a vulnerability. There may be a vulnerability somebody hasn't found, hence why 0 days exist. But otherwise, it's really more of an issue of like execution. Like, what is the app in particular? Are we sure that it's been audited and that it's reasonably safe? What platform are you putting it on? Is your desktop secure? You're confident that it's not compromised? Just kind of the general things. But like in a theoretical sense, no, there's not really any particular risk where it's like, no, you should never do this no matter what. It's just, it depends on making sure that each step of the process is up to the measure you need it to be.
Next question is from Jalvim. Moving to a new place, was wondering if it was useful to add another name on the letterbox. Like that, I can use my address with John Doe on it, an alias email, and hopefully no phone number. The post woman/man would see the other names, but whatever. And if the address gets leaked, it's just linked to another name than mine, even though it's my real address. Definitely see if they'll accept it. I've actually never tried this before. And keep in mind too that there's likely at some point going to be something that links you to that. So if you want better separation, definitely try to get a dedicated private mailbox address. You can typically find these by just going to Yelp and typing in like private mailbox near me. And a lot of these providers will charge anywhere from like $15 to $25 a month. And it's a lot more peace of mind. And it's something I highly recommend doing, because also then you can freely move. You don't have to switch your addresses all the time. And it's kind of like privacy.com in a sense of like, you just switch the backend bank, but you get to keep all your cards the same with alias emails and stuff like that. So check that out, see if it works for you. Of course, it is a step in the right direction if you are able to do this still.
I agree with Henry. In my experience, USPS is kind of a stickler for using your real name, and it's really hard to add like a company or a fake name. It's also worth noting that this is a data breach defense strategy, but it may not defend you against mass surveillance. Like Henry said, there's probably other things that are linking your real name to that address, like utility bills. A lot of them will run credit checks, cable, stuff like that, home insurance. This won't really protect against mass surveillance, but it's a really cool idea, and it's one less area to be leaked and linked together. So if you can get away with it, I don't think it's a bad idea, but it's definitely not the only idea. And then our last question of the week comes from Riddick. You said stock Android usually has a lot of telemetry and other privacy issues. If you buy a Lenovo tablet, because right now you can't afford an Android tablet, like a Pixel tablet with a custom ROM, which is totally fair. Pixels are a little expensive. So if you buy a cheaper tablet and then you use ADB to remove the bloatware, how does this improve the privacy profile? And how can I further increase it aside from disabling the settings and using a VPN and all that kind of standard user-friendly entry-level stuff that we recommend? So I mentioned this last week that I've heard some people claim that ADB doesn't remove it, it just hides it. According to Lumo, who seemed pretty confident, but take it with a grain of salt, ADB can fully uninstall apps. And I'm assuming there's probably a caveat there, like maybe there's certain really privileged apps that ADB can't remove, like probably the system settings, for example. But in terms of things like Gemini, the YouTube app, the Facebook app, theoretically, if ADB is able to remove it, it is gone. And if it can't remove it, it will tell you, it'll be like failed in the platform. So, and theoretically, if the app is not there, the app is not there. There's no one it can submit data to. There's no, vulnerability in this app, SDK, whatever. So yeah, if ADB will remove the bloatware or even some of it, that is, in my opinion, definitely a privacy improvement. I think that's probably the most you can do. Like we recommend settings, VPNs, DNS blockers, not using the standard apps, switching to privacy alternatives. ADB is definitely like an advanced step that really takes it to the next level. So I think between all of that, you're probably going to be in a really good shape.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd agree. I'd say you can do 80% of the work but it's a lot more patchwork DIY, not as foolproof. So if you're somebody who's just trying to do the best you can, you're on a budget, you can get 80% of the way there by doing this, and it's going to be a bit more DIY. It's not going to be as polished. You might have certain things break. You're going to have like system links that are broken. I do think ADB can uninstall apps. I'm fairly certain. So that might be an issue because I'm pretty sure you can disable and like uninstall pre-installed apps and manufacturer specific apps. So you guys can let us know in the comments. But yeah, there's a lot to do here with ADB. Just know that it's a lot of patchwork and there isn't like a 100% fully established way to do this, like evidence-based, if that makes sense. It's a lot of just like, oh, here's what I did. And I'm a person on the internet, which is totally cool. That's a great way to share information, but just know that it's not going to be quite as thorough.
Those were all our questions this week. Quite a lot of them. We had a series of questions about phone privacy, some Cloudflare concerns, some questions about the recent Firefox terms of service changes, many, many more. A lot of great questions this week. A lot of questions, but really good questions. Thank you guys for tuning in and asking questions. We really appreciate your support and the ability to answer your questions and share this with everyone else who's watching. If you're not already on Patreon and you want to join the Q&A, you can do that at patreon.com/surveillancepod. We also have XMR chat. Nobody asked any XMR chat questions this week, but xmrchat.com/surveillancepod, where you can leave a one-time Monero tip and feel free to ask a question there. So thank you guys so much for listening. We will see you next week with the news.